right, hello everybody. We'll hand over to our first speaker, Salvador Capella-Guiterrez from the Spanish node, who will go on to introduce the following speakers. And then, as I say, at the end, we'll come back to Salva and we'll conduct a question and answer. Over to you, Salva.
Thank you very much, Jonathan, for the introduction and explaining a little bit the context. So we will have today 4 speakers going through the different work packages that we have in this joint strategic implementation study. As Jonathan was pointing out, this implementation study is the continuation of a previous one. And it's a joint work between the compute and the tools platform, because we share synergy across the 2 platforms in regarding how we prepare software, how we package software, and then make that software executable. So in this particular implementation study, we have, for instance, software container technologies, especially Docker and Singularity, that, as you might know, Docker has been quite popular to facilitate the packaging of software, while Singularity, following the same ideas, has been chosen to be used in HPC settings, especially because all the problems that Docker might have when it comes to root permission in HPC settings. So this, if we go to the next slide, so this implementation study that lasts for 3 years implies the use of different resources from ELIXIR as a broad. So here we're going to be talking a little bit about ELIXIR bio.tool. So we have close to 30,000 software registered in this registry. But it's not just about individual tools, so we have also Workflow Hub as a mechanism to register workflows and to work toward the reproducibility of such a workflows by having, for instance, RAW crate, that is great mechanisms to somehow capture provenance, but also great mechanisms to describe workflows in this particular case. We shouldn't forget about FAIR, but not FAIR in the sense of data, but FAIR in the sense of digital objects and those aspects that has to do with reproducible science. And as you can see in the slide, it's quite important. Workflows are quite important, more than ever, probably, because we already struggle to ensure reproducibility. That is probably one of the mechanisms, one of the tools that we have to work in that direction. But of course, we might have software, we might have workflows, but if we are not able to describe or to have that software ready to be executed, we might fall short. That is the reason, because we have been also putting the focus on this implementation study around biocontainers and software containers in general, just to facilitate this packaging of the software, just to facilitate the deployment of containers across different environments, and how we orchestrate that execution. Specifically, you see there a connection with the compute platform task number 3. If we go to the next slide, here you have an example of all these abstract concepts that I have been mentioning, and probably the pandemic has been somehow terrible from the human perspective, but really nice from the technology perspective, because many things has been shown to work, and how we can rely on technology to advance understanding of this disease in particular. So if I manage to go to I think there is my final slide. So the project plan for this implementation study has implied 13 nodes. If my memory is not failing, this is one of the biggest ever in ELIXIR, with a lot of coordination and a lot of work. So from here, I would like just to thank everyone who has been involved, all the task leads or the work package leads who have been making sure that things happen, because in such a complex implementation study, it's important to acknowledge people who has been driving this effort. So the official duration of the implementation study was expected for 24 months, although the activities has gone a little bit farther than May this year. And today we're in the end of October, we're finalizing this implementation study as an example. At the very beginning, Jonathan was introducing this idea of, well, we have this work for work packages here to have, work package 1 about user community engagement and adoption, work package 2 about technical support for users, and then work package 3 for providers. And finally, work package 4 looking forward to how do we sustain the different assets that we have identified in the implementation study that we believe are important, and how we prepare ourselves for the future to come. Saying that, I would like to go to the next slide, and our next speaker, if my memory again is not failing, is Eva Alloza from the ELIXIR Spanish Study. Eva, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Salva. Yeah, so I'm gonna present the activities that we've done in the work package 1, user community engagement and adoption. 6 nodes were involved in this work package, but also in close collaboration with the technical support for users and providers work packages. Without them, we couldn't have done our activities, of course. So work package 1 was focused mainly on fostering the community and increasing user engagement across ELIXIR to adopt and deploy container technologies. Next slide, please. To do so, we prepared a survey. We opened a survey to all communities and focus groups in ELIXIR. I must thank the ELIXIR Communities Coordinator and the Hub personnel to ensure the efficient communication to gather these use cases relating to communities and focus groups. From this survey, we got 10 use cases, and they supplied information about the maturity of their use case, the technical expertise that they had, the provision or usage of these container technologies, also the usage of software development best practices, and if they were adopting standards, principles, and formats. The next slide, please. Now we can see these survey results. In general, most of the use cases had already passed the proof of concept stage. And it seems like some basic questions that they could be answered by training themselves. The technical expertise regarding containers, they had different levels, also differing on the level of their use case. So we must expect all levels of knowledge when contacting them. Also, in terms of container providers or users, most of them use a general purpose of containers, with a fair number using also these containers in HPC environments. Next slide, please. Regarding the adoption of software development best practices, we saw that all of them were using version control. Most of them issue tracking as well. And also on the other side, we could say that the continuous integration and continuous deployment practices were not so much followed, or the testing. In the sense of standards or other methodologies, all of them or most of them were using the FAIR principles, were adopted, and the rest probably were like more specific depending on each use case. Next slide, please. Here you have the list of projects. I'm not gonna read them, but there was a wide variety of them, of topics linked to different disciplines and also to different ELIXIR communities. Next slide, please. So what we did once we had all these 10 use cases, because of the survey, the information was quite limited. We decided to conduct one-to-one meetings with them to better understand the challenges and the needs that they had, also the service technologies or standards that they were using, and those ones that they're willing to adopt or deploy. In this one-to-one meetings that it was the use case together with the work packages of user and provider support. There was a conversation, so we could provide them already with some solutions, some hints, and also some support documentation for them to start working. Then after having this meeting with these different meetings with the 10 use cases, we realized that some questions could be like general for them and some others more specific. So we decided to run a Q&A workshop so we could control the agenda and also to ask them beforehand which were the topics that they were more interested. So in this way, we prepared an agenda to introduce the container technologies. Also, we promoted the software best practices and also the available services from the tools and the compute platform, and also to give the floor to address these questions and topics of interest. Now, well, after this webinar, you will have access to the slides, and there you have the link where you can access the slides and also the recording of this Q&A workshop. In parallel, we created a dedicated Slack channel in the ELIXIR workspace, in the sense that these use cases could follow up the technical conversation with the experts from this implementation study. And I want to hint also that everything was developed in collaboration with members of the technical support to users and provider work packages. And in this sense, this collaboration with use cases was valuable input for them, for these two work packages, to update their documentation of the services and also taking into account their needs and questions. Next slide, please. Here you can see some questions, like a summary of the questions that we gather from them. As you can see, some of them are kind of entry level of expertise. Some others come up, are questions that come up in later stages when you have like a more expert level. And we also had some questions regarding communities. So they were willing their community to adopt these technologies, and also to be a bit more autonomous in the sense of creating containers for their own tools. Next slide, please. And so, yeah. So finally, it's worth noting that some of the actions we explained and promoted the software best practices and available services from tools and compute platform. And finally, we curated a collection of training materials for end users, software developers, and system administrators. These are training materials and hands-on tutorials for mainly beginners and intermediate level. And this is available in TESS, which is the registry for training and events materials of the training platform of ELIXIR. And you'll have there also in the slides the link to this collection and to access these training materials. And that's it from Work Package 1.
Thank you. Sorry. Yeah, thank you very much, Eva. And for our next work package, we go to Frederick Coppens to summarize the work there. Thank you, Frederick.
Thanks, Jonathan. So I'll indeed go over what we've done in work package 2 was around the technical support. So here we work together with Eva and the use cases that she just showed to provide some support on how to actually do this, oriented towards the users, as the title implies. So if you go to the next slide, many people in ELIXIR will be familiar with this ecosystem. It's a kind of a technical roadmap. In EOSC Live, we called it the Tools and Workflow Collaboratory. This maps also to what, for example, the tools ecosystem within the tools platform in ELIXIR is. And within ELIXIR, within the kind of the technical crowd, tools platform, compute platform, we're very familiar with this and what this means and how these things are interconnecting, how we can work with this. But we do need to realize that this is not the case for everybody. If you look at this, this is a very complex ecosystem where you need a lot of background knowledge to actually be able to use it. So that's what we try to address and try to point people in the right direction, how to solve certain problems, because not every technology is suited for every use case. And that's what we try to do in consultation together with Eva and Alvaro, to kind of guide people in the right direction, that some technologies, well, don't bother looking at this. Other things are way more suited for what you specifically want to do. Or on the other hand, have you already thought about that one, because that exactly does what you need. So this is kind of the ecosystem we try to explain. And if you go to the next slide, what we did is collect information on this, because there's a, I mean, on the previous slides, you had some logos, but okay, where do I now find concrete things? So we first collected this in a Google spreadsheet, which is, of course, well, I mean, it's nice, but it's not the thing we're going to maintain. So we need better ways of doing that. And if you go to the next slide, then what we did is kind of capture that information and put it in RDM-Kit. I guess many of you are already familiar with RDM-Kit. This is the toolkit that we've assembled for research data management as part of the Converge project. And in this specific task, we have added to the data analysis task. You can see the link here. You can see the kind of outline of the page. And we've tried to capture kind of what do you now need to be able to understand this ecosystem, so you can kind of take this information and beyond the project also find similar info that we try to do for the use cases. And on the next slide, I've kind of given a summary of what are these tasks that we are thinking of. So around best practices for data analysis, around the packaging, how can you do this, what is out there, where can you find the relevant information, relevant training information, guidance documents for your specific use case, with, of course, a focus on containers in this implementation study. And then finally, how do we link this to workflow management systems? Because having your analysis up and running is one thing. Being able to share and reuse it, you really need to kind of take into account a number of things. Those are the best practices. And if you implement this or use workflow management systems to make this happen, then you often have kind of a lot of these bases already covered. So within RDM-Kit, and as a kind of summary output for this task within the implementation study, we've added this information all there. And this is also the resource that we are committed in ELIXIR to maintain long-term as part of the RDM community, as part of ELIXIR as a whole. So here we will kind of continue to reap the benefits of having this implementation study within ELIXIR. I think this was my last slide, and handing it over to work package 3.
Thank you very much, Frederick. So work package 3 is then on technical support for providers. And I think Alex Kanitz is going to speak to these next couple of slides. So
yeah,
we're sharing from the hub, so just go ahead and say next slide when you need
sure.
to.
Correct. Thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, so work package 3 is a bit complementary to Frederick, as you already mentioned. So this work package is focused on technical support for providers. So providers in this sense are like providers of services and administrators. So people who are actually consuming or services that are actually consuming or orchestrating the execution of containers. And in so the work package is split up into 2 tasks. So one is technical support for service providers and administrators, and then a second task is also related to the technical and policy liaison within ELIXIR and EOS communities. At the bottom of the slide, you will see outlined the milestones and deliverables, and in the next slides, I will summarize the work that has been done to achieve those milestones and deliverables. Next slide, please. Hello? Sorry. Yes. Yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm looking at a different document. So yeah, so one thing I should mention is that so we have basically taken two service providers, as we could call them, that are like present in the ELIXIR sphere, um, uh, to work on this work package. And one is Galaxy, and the other one is the ELIXIR Cloud, which is I guess Galaxy you all know. The ELIXIR Cloud maybe you don't. ELIXIR Cloud is based on a driver project for the Global Alliance for Genomics and Health, and it's a prototype service that implements G4GH services and tries to set up a G4GH clouds for workflow orchestration. So for the first milestone, documentation and materials, Galaxy has a very rich ecosystem of documentation and courses and workshops. During the course of this implementation study, like the documentation of Galaxy and Pulsar and Planemo. Planemo is a command line toolkit for Galaxy, have been updated, and they're very rich, so you can find all kind of information. And moreover, there's like 48 admin training courses available for Galaxy, so it's quite a bit. There's also a dedicated admin learning path. So if you follow that, you can spend a week on really polishing up your admin skills. So that's really nice. There's also 21 developer courses. So those are for, if you want to write Galaxy workflows and things like that. And there's also a focus on containerization there. And so there have also been at least 2 workshops that have been taking place during the time of the implementation study. One on admin training with the EOS Live community, and one on tool developer training with the EOS Fair Ease community. So those are also links on the policy liaison with EOS. On ELIXIR Cloud, it's of course a much smaller project. We could establish a documentation hub. There is content now for admins as well as for users. There isn't too much on the developer side yet. That will come in the future, but for sure the hub is there. So that's a one-stop shop for the documentation on that end. There's also a couple of Jupyter Notebook demos and tutorials that demonstrate the features of the ELIXIR Cloud and how you can use it, particularly for federated analysis use cases. On the next slide, please. On the second topic, the second milestone, M3.2, reusable front-end components. So the idea was to create like front-end components that operationalize container orchestration platforms. And on this end, Galaxy has a completely new user interface based on reusable view components. You can read the blog article there. That's quite interesting. And also, Galaxy has worked hard on improving accessibility since Galaxy 23.0 and beyond. And on the ELIXIR Cloud side, there is we have established a suite of web components. Web components is a technology that is independent of different front-end platforms such as like Vue or Angular or React. And so these can be, like the components in this suite can be easily incorporated into pretty much any website through the use of custom HTML tags. And so there's been a couple of new components. So I think in the suite currently we have a set of we have only, I think, the service registry component for G4GH service registry API and subcomponents for that. But during this year's Google Summer of Code, we have 3 more like GUI plugins for 3 other G4GH APIs for the TRS, WES, and TESS. And those ones are not integrated in the suite yet, but that should happen by the end of the year. On the publication side, that's the first deliverable. Galaxy has updated the publication on the main Galaxy platform, as well as published a paper on the Planemo toolkit. And on the ELIXIR Cloud side, we are still preparing a publication describing a federated execution of containerized tasks. And this we do together with the ELIXIR Compute Task 2 hybrid cloud task. and that should also happen within the next couple of weeks or months. Besides those milestones and deliverables, I would like to highlight some Galaxy progress that is related to this implementation study. First of all, there is almost 100,000 Singularity and Docker containers in the Galaxy ecosystem, representing 23 terabytes of data. And there has been increased adoption of GA4GH standards, including TESS and TRS, which I highlight here because they're related to container orchestration. TESS is a standard for executing a task inside a given container on any so in a platform compute backend independent way. This is also like a main focal point where like the ELIXIR Cloud and Galaxy platforms or providers can integrate on in the future. So the plan is to achieve container execution on Galaxy's Pulsar network, and to use TESS as an API in front of that to achieve that in a sort of batch execution manner. On the TRS side, Galaxy is able to pull workflows from the EOS Workflow Hub or DocStore, which are two main implementations of TRS, which have by now hundreds or even thousands of workflows in there in different languages. For Galaxy, this also means that there is a click to run feature. So if you go on Workflow Hub on a Galaxy workflow, there will be links that allow you to like trigger a workflow run. So you can browse like a workflow registry, and then from there start a workflow run. And there is training materials for that available as well. And then there is so a very big project is the EOS Neuroscience Gateway, where Galaxy is one key part. It's like a long-term infrastructure project for Europe that's going to last until 2025. There are 6 national Galaxy servers and 12 Pulsar endpoints involved in that. In the context of the Neuroscience Gateway, Galaxy has also come to a memorandum of understanding with OpenAir and EOS Fair East for improved verification of Galaxy workflows and artifacts produced from them. There is a service level agreement with professional container like compute infrastructures with EGI and IISAS. And finally, there's been like first talks with Skills for EOS to lift the training platform to beyond ELIXIR. With that, I would like to hand over to Work Package 4. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Alex. The final work package of the 4, if you could reshare, David, is on the longer term sustainability. The sustainability, we're all doing it today, sustainable service portfolio. And our speaker on this topic is Justin Clark-Casey from EBI. Over to you, Justin.
Hello. Okay, first slide, please. Right, so this was the final work package of the 4, and it was trying to address one of these interminable questions, of course, that we all know in this field, which is when you've created all these fantastic services and everything. Now, how do you actually keep them going? So there's a kind of a number of questions related to this, and we explored this via 2 online workshops, and in those workshops doing various discussion and polling, and then there will also be a forthcoming deliverable, which will kind of summarize what we had looked into and thought about. So this kind of tackled, I mean, the initial thing was to look at things specific containers, and we did that, but you do kind of end up spilling over to more generic issues because you end up saying, well, okay, we've got this service, but you know, what are the other considerations? So we looked at both of those aspects. So of the kind of questions we looked at, there were 4 kind of areas, or well, various kinds of areas. So one of the first was, first of all, what makes a project eligible? Because it's all very well saying, yes, you've got to sustain all these things, but then, well, you know, when you look at these projects, why would you go, well, that is worth sustaining and that isn't? You can't sustain everything. We simply don't have infinite resources, as we know very well. So one of the questions is, well, what criteria do you actually apply to kind of make this decision? Of course, it's quite a broad question, but it was one we did want to look at a little bit. And we looked at various options. I haven't gone through everything here because, of course, we've got limited time. But we kind of came to various things we considered about whether something had to be, say, in production, actually kind of out there and being used, or whether it could still be development, and things of like, well, okay, if a project is just used by one institute who may have created it, how does that compare to a project which is be created by multiple places and is actually widely used even outside those places? So those are the two criteria we kind of came to that really to choose something to be sustainable, you do want it to be in production and to be widely used. And then leading on from that, the next question is, well, okay, now we've got some kind of idea of criteria, then what projects actually are candidates? And we looked at various categories here. They're all the ones that people have already discussed in previous work packages that we've had presented here today. It kind of covers the whole area. I mean, it's a very broad area when you really look at, well, what actually are all the things that come into both producing something and, of course, keeping it going. So things like packaging, what packaging are you using, or the registries out there for different containers. We've seen workflow, we've seen task execution. So we looked at all of those, and it's both many of the ones we've seen in this container study, but also things that are a little bit outside. I mean, you start thinking about, well, okay, things like Nextflow, for example, that is a project that's required of many of these things, but then does that kind of like, then how do you argue sustainable funding there? That is a bit different. That's a commercial model. So you look at these different models, and in fact, that's one of the eligibility things we looked at, whether something actually is commercial or not, and we didn't really go for that one in the end. But that was kind of looking at the things, and then actually looking, once you've kind of gone, okay, what should be sustained, what's actually candidate, then what activities actually count as sustainability, and this really varies by context. And we had a broad-ranging discussion. This is just summarized here. If you want more details, please look at the forthcoming report. And again, it's in the context of when you don't have infinite resources, you've got to actually make a decision here. So sustaining activities, and we conducted in the end a poll on this, and the three that which came pretty much top are having the compute and storage to run the thing, which is probably not really a surprise. If you don't have that, you don't have a service at all. Resolving security issues also came very high. I mean, we see constantly that there are kind of features and problems out there, and it's only going to get worse if we start dealing with very sensitive data. So that's actually was in the second of our poll, that actually having the funding to go and resolve those is very important. You can't just stick a service up on cloud and then call it a day. You've actually got to keep looking at the issues that are going to come up as the packages you're relying upon find vulnerabilities themselves. Then you've really got to go and update your service, otherwise you are vulnerable and maybe your data is vulnerable as well. And then thirdly, actually sustaining the community came up very strongly as an activity, isn't it? Okay, great, you've put your service up on the cloud, you're actually looking at security issues, but if you don't actually have a community nurtured around it who know how to use it and maybe can actually help it being extended further, then really you've not got something that's actually going to go somewhere and actually might prove over time to be something worth sustaining. You've got to have a community there using it. So actually having some kind of funding to sustain them in some way, whether that's answering kind of like service queries or whether that's actually writing blog posts or documentation, that's also considered very important. That was the third in our poll. And a couple of things that are actually kind of like not really considered sustaining activities. I mean, probably fairly obvious, but these can be gray areas depending on where you want to draw the line. So developing new features naturally is not really a sustaining activity, but you can kind of go down the scale. You can say, yeah, sure, developing a massive new thing for a version. And next version is maybe not on the cards. But then what if you just making kind of a very small enhancement to a UI, for example, or maybe even a bug fix? So there's a bit of gray area there, but in a very broad sense, developing whole new stuff can't really fall under sustaining activity. And then finally, actually applying for new grants to actually develop the thing further, that's not really I mean, that, again, another gray area. Is that a sustaining activity? Not really, strictly speaking, in terms of keeping the thing just up and running, but that's more for like new feature development. So that was another thing that we thought, no, in that case. Next slide, please. And then a fourth question. So this is very important, particularly in the context of container services, and that we've seen issues where I think the big one was Docker Hub, where there's quite a high reliance on them for container storage, but they were previously providing things under a free plan, which was possible to use for our own services. But they also, in the past, they proposed to actually start changing that plan so that we would have to end up paying for what we were using. And this has caused a big issue if these things do not have a lot of sustaining funding in the first place. What happens when somebody you're relying upon to actually have your service up suddenly starts wanting a lot of money? And this is not unexpected. These companies can provide things for free for a certain while, but maybe they are in the long term looking to capture a market and then start charging. You've got to be prepared for that. So we considered a whole bunch of options, and there's really no easy answer here. The kind of things we considered were, for example, in the first case, never rely. Don't ever rely on such a service in the first place. Always try and only use things maybe you can host yourself, and of course that in itself has considerable costs, which is why these cloud services have become so popular in the first place. But one option is, yes, never rely, very strict. A second one is backfill. Yes, if you're dependent, the service you're depending on starts charging, then try and maybe either start having somebody provide it for free. Maybe it's open core and you can install the thing yourself and start providing it. Maybe you can even write some code to just fulfill the same thing that thing was doing. And then thirdly, okay, so instead of using proprietary APIs, sometimes try and only use standard stuff which does have competition. So Kubernetes, for example, try and make sure you're using very standard Kubernetes interfaces so that if say Google starts charging a lot of money for their service, you can just pause and go to Amazon. I know it's never really that simple, but that's the idea of the third. And then fourthly, well, okay, realistically, sometimes people aren't going to start charging. And the very fact that these are valuable services, and if the alternative is, well, you would either have to shut down your system, very worst case, or maybe you have to start hosting it yourself, which in itself has considerable costs in terms of paying for staff, and maybe inevitably you're not running at the scale, so that your costs are much higher. Maybe you just have to be prepared to pay. Maybe there's got to be some way of saying, well, there's going to be a fund somewhere, and if this kind of service dependencies do start charging, well, okay, there's a place that you can go to actually pay for it. And of course, all these have pros and cons. I'm not go through that here. I know I've already taken a lot of time. You can see that in the report. But there are various things you can consider. I'm sure there's more things that will kind of come along in the future. So the final three topics here, we looked at ELIXIR and sustainability. I won't speak too much about this because there are people much more knowledgeable about this than me. But it's in the report, what the discussion we have. Things about, well, can ELIXIR directly fund some of these things? That's always a tricky question, I know, because there's all kinds of legal issues around spending EU funds for these kind of purposes, just to give one example. But I know ELIXIR are looking at some of this. I know AAI is one of the chief candidates for some kind of direct funding, I believe. And then insurance funding, right? If you go back to the top and you have some kind of option of, well, okay, if a service starts charging, well, maybe you have to pay. Well, maybe there's some insurance funding that ELIXIR can help do that for a while whilst you decide what you want to do about this situation. And then penultimately, EOSC and sustainability, another hot topic. As we know, EOSC is a very multi-faceted and changing beast of what it may or may not be able to do in terms of getting funding. There's no easy answers here. It's a very big project. As you all know, people know much better than me. And many things are being funded, but you can't go and fund everything. And they are looking at, of course, many people from many, many domains coming. I mean, I know there's if you just look at workflow systems, there's hundreds of those. You couldn't possibly hope to go and give all those money to sustain themselves. So that is a complex and dynamic, changing thing, and we'll see how that goes. But also, the strategy was, well, if you want to go and try and get some sustainability out of EOSC, either directly or indirectly, then how do you do that? Well, the answer here is go and promote your services to EOSC members. And I know many people are very hard at work doing exactly that. And Alvaro being a particular example, I think, of going to EOSC and getting the services used even more broadly than outside bioinformatics there. And of course, that may well lead to a sustainability story. And then very finally, kind of for fun in a certain way, is like, well, okay, can we look at a completely different ecosystem and see if there's any inspiration for sustainability funding there? And a particular ecosystem here was the Web3 ecosystem. And this is all the stuff around kind of blockchain and around public goods funding and tokenization and incentivization there, because that's a very hot area that actually introduces something new in terms of token-based funding, for example. So we looked at two particular sub areas here. Number one being the idea of grant programs. So there's something out there called Gitcoin, for example, which runs its own kind of grant funding in a very different model from the grant funding that we're used to. It's kind of like a public-private, not public-private, but kind of like there's a there's people who contribute publicly to rounds of funding, and they get matched in a quadratic fashion. And this is a kind of like an algorithm which basically tries to actually match funding depending on the popularity of the service amongst many people, and not just maybe by grant funding amounts. So if for instance, 5,000 people contribute $1, then that's going to get matched by quadratic funding by a lot more funding from another fund than if one person contributes $5,000. And they have actually run kind of grant rounds for decentralized science in the past. And who knows what might happen there in the future. Either there may be, you never know, funding from there, or we could even run our own round. And there's kind of pros and cons associated with that that are kind of in more detail in the report. And very finally, the final sub area was, okay, we're always looking for kind of grant-based funding, but there's always the thing of like, well, maybe people can pay directly, right, as they do for, say, pay on demand or pay for use cloud services. Can you actually even extend that to our containers-based services? And this takes you into the world of tokenization and incentivization. Can you in some way not only pay directly for the compute you use, but actually make payments for the components you use? So for example, if CWL is used in a workflow, and that workflow is run, say, through some kind of system that we have, maybe a workflow hub, maybe something else, then can there be some kind of very small payment for that actual use of CWL, which goes back to a CWL fund, which helps towards sustainability? And there's of course, as you can imagine, this is a very interesting and complex area and very speculative, but that also is detailed much more in the report. And I think that's pretty much it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Justin. So those are the 4 work packages, and we'll switch back again now for one final conclusion slide to Salva, who is one of the co-leads for the entire project. It was originally co-led by Salva and Stephen Newhouse, who obviously moved on from EBI a couple of years ago. So Salva, if you'd like to sort of conclude and consider future prospects.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jonathan. As you can see, the entire project have these 4 work packages. They cover different areas, from the more engagement with the use cases, work package 1, work package 2, we saw the interaction with the users, work package 3 with providers, and finally the future and the sustainability of the whole effort, which is probably the most interesting one, and also where we have less certainties, because there are many different options. Depends also very much where we want to go and whether how much we want to scale up the whole effort. So coming to a conclusion, I would say that one aspect that is clear across all the different work packages is that software containers are crucial, are vital to support for reproducible bioinformatics work. So to me, software containers are the building block that allow us to reproduce work. Of course, it's not the only building block, but probably it's the basic unit in the sense that later on we can have workflows and other systems. I will argue through and looking through the different work packages that in ELIXIR we have established a network of experts and services where we have bring together different community users and experts in the sense of service providers. So we have understand the technology, we have explored those technologies and what are the challenges when deploying those components, part of the stack or others. And then of course, we are very much looking forward into the sustainability of the service portfolio. Looking at the future, sustainability is probably the keywords. How do we sustain the services that we have identified? And probably the most relevant one is the Docker image storage. Can we in ELIXIR find alternative solution to guarantee the distribution of those software container images or not? How we interact with different projects that have started, that are starting now, that will be starting in the future. How we make sure that those the work that we have done here across the different work packages can be leveraged, can be taken up by different projects, not just in ELIXIR, but those where ELIXIR is participating, And probably that is the way to sustain different aspects of this work. Of course, we need to show that the work that we have done has an impact. Because if we show that we have an impact, then it's much easier to justify what the work can be taken by others at European level, national level, and internationally. Here you can see basically hot off the press the starter kit that is based in containers, especially the computerized container component of the GDI, the European Genomics and Data Infrastructure, which is led by ELIXIR Czech, and many others. So I will argue, for instance, that another project called VIB-UGhent, so the European Cancer Images, is following all the recommendations that have been produced in ELIXIR to containerize, to register, and to follow up the best practices by ELIXIR. The question is, at the end of the day, how we bring those aspects in the next scientific program, so we have the opportunity to keep working together, to keep exploring here in a safe and highly technological space where we have developers, but we also have community members in the context of the new ELIXIR scientific program, which is expected to run for 5 years, from 24 to 28. So how we leverage this work and bring it there and keep pushing. So thank you, everyone. I would like to thank not just work package leaders and task leads, but also people from the hub. So Jonathan, Gavin, and others who has been behind us, supporting us, just pushing all the work so that we also deliver to the whole community. Thank you, guys.